to talk to us about the implications of the budget to us here in Western Australia and maybe some of the pros and cons of what's been put down before us. We have the Senator for Western Australia, Mathias Cormann, joins us now to tell us what's the budget all about. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
How do we refer to you? Senator or just Mathias?
Call me Matthias.
Matthias,
yeah,
all right.
fine. Yeah, sure, no worries at all.
Beautiful name. I didn't know whether it was Mathias or Matthias.
No, it's Matthias, yeah, but I mean, I get all sorts of different combinations.
Well, before we start talking about the budget then, let's talk about you. So you came to visit Perth in 1994, decided you loved the place so much you moved back 2 years later.
That's exactly right. I mean, what a great place, what a great lifestyle and all, those fantastic opportunities. And yeah, I've not looked back. I mean, Australia's been very good to me, yeah.
It's funny that sometimes, because obviously you're Belgian originally, your family's still there, you sometimes get people sort of saying, oh yeah, but they're not West Australian, but you live here because you choose to.
I have absolutely made a conscious decision to live here, and it's a fantastic place. I mean, in Australia, I'm like many other Australians. I'm a migrant to Australia, but here, if you put your shoulder to the wheel and you want to, get stuck in, there's really no limit to what you can do and what you can achieve. And I'm very pleased with the opportunities that I've had since I've been here.
And did you know that you were going to go into politics, or I think your background is law, isn't it?
Yes, I studied law at university. I've always had an interest in public service through the political process, and I mean I'm sort of like everybody who gets involved in politics, whatever side of politics that is. We want to make a difference, and the political process is a great way to make a difference.
You've certainly had a very rapid rise, I guess you could say, but I mean, from when you first arrived here, you're actually one of the advisors for Richard Court.
I was. I worked as a chief of staff for one of his ministers, and then for 1 year as a senior advisor for Richard Court, yes.
And he's still got a very good reputation. Whether it's Labor or Liberal, most people respect the fact that Richard Court did a very good job as Premier of the state.
He was a great Premier, absolutely.
Yeah. And of course his old man did a good job too, Sir Richard.
So you've dabbled in a little bit.
But
moving on, yeah.
Well, we'd better let people know who you are and why you're sitting here telling us all about the budget. So, question number one: what's your assessment of where things are at with the Labor government's first budget?
I mean, I've just come back from Canberra. We've spent a week through the Senate estimates process, going through the budget in fine detail. And I mean, I guess our overall assessment is that it's a high-taxing, high-spending budget which targets the people that we think the government doesn't like people with private health insurance. Over the last 6 months, I guess, Wayne Swan has been telling us how we've got to fight inflation, we've got to cut spending, and we were very surprised to see that spending is actually up by a whopping $15 billion, which is, of course, why the government had to sort of look around for some tax measures that they could introduce. And the two major tax measures are the tax that's been talked about a lot on, the 70% increase of the tax on alcopops, which will rise about $3 billion, and of course a $2.5 billion tax increase for the North West Shelf project, which was actually a project that got off the ground in 1977 with Sir Charles Court being a key driver behind that project to make it happen.
Right. Oh.
Go on.
I was just going to say also one of what we heard earlier is the Fuel Watch sort of initiative, and I just want to know what are the ins and outs of the Fuel Watch initiative. Isn't the federal government's initiative based on the WA Fuel Watch scenario? So what's the controversy all about, number one, and shouldn't we be doing everything we can to cut fuel prices?
We should do everything we can, absolutely. I mean, if you sort of go back to what was said before the last election, petrol prices then, like they are now, were a big political issue. And I guess Kevin Rudd went out and about and told people, or made people believe, and people were left with the impression that he could do something about fuel prices. Now, last week what he said is that essentially there's nothing else he can do other than introduce Fuel Watch. Now, Fuel Watch, when it comes to keeping petrol prices down, hasn't worked. Now, don't take my word for it. I mean, that is the advice that the government has from its four most senior economic departments, like the Prime Minister's own Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, the Department of Energy and Resources, the Department of Finance and the Department of Industry Development. They've all provided him with independent advice to say that Fuel Watch doesn't actually bring prices down. At worst, it could actually be worse. It could actually put prices up overall. It's their assessment. And
my concern with that statement is that, I mean, again, by telling people what the prices are isn't going to change the price. I mean, we've just been shown now we can get fuel for $1.48 today. That means, are we going to drive past a service station that has it for $1.58 today? So that it certainly raises awareness. Has it changed people's buying habits? So will more people buy fuel on a Tuesday, for example, than they will on a Saturday now because they've been made aware of the cycle. Yep. I'm not saying whether it's helping in the fuel prices at all, but has it helped to inform the population? Does that have any impact?
Well, there's two components to the fuel watch scheme. The component of informing consumers of what prices are being charged at different petrol stations, that is something that we support, and that's something that we think ought to continue and should be expanded nationally. But the component where petrol stations are told that once they submit a price, they can't change it for 24 hours. That is, if the price at petrol station A is 10 cents higher than the price at petrol station B, they cannot reduce it, even if they wanted to, for 24 hours. That's price fixing. And the advice that the government has before it is that that actually will result quite likely in an overall increase in petrol prices rather than bring petrol prices down.
I honestly think the fuel watch model, if it was made that they had to state at the start of the day what the maximum price was going to be, and then they were allowed to make it lower, because I think the whole idea in the first place was to stop people from price gouging halfway through the day. You know, you drive past in the morning, go, oh, $1.52, I'll get fuel on the way home. Then you go on the way home and it's $1.70. That was the whole idea in the first place. So would it work, do you think, if the same model was maintained, except for the fact that service stations are allowed to go lower than their notified price?
I think you should put your hand up to be an advisor to the Prime Minister. I mean, I think that, clearly what we need is competition all throughout the day, and for people to be allowed and entitled to reduce their prices if that's what they want to do, and if that's what they're prepared to do, to keep attracting motorists to their petrol station. I guess the practical initiative that we've put forward is that we've proposed to reduce the fuel excise by 5 cents a litre.
Now you're talking my language. This is the problem I have. 4 years ago, when fuel was 85, 90 cents a litre, there was a certain number of litres of fuel getting sold around Australia. That money, that excise, the percentage-based excise, was designed to fix road problems and transport issues, and that money was supposed to go back into those areas. Now, it seems to me, and again, I'm probably totally wrong, which is why I'm here and not in Canberra, but if the government was to come up with a fixed price per litre rather than a sliding scale percentage, surely that would take the, excuse me, I got your disease, surely that would take the pressure off the motorist, because if the government said, for example, okay, we need, round figure, 20 cents a litre. 20 cents a litre is what it's going to cost for all the litres that get sold around Australia. Over the last 30 years, we know how much fuel everyone buys, aside from the fact that obviously now they buy a bit less because it's so expensive. If that 20 cents was set, rather than, okay, fuel goes up to $1.50, so now that 20 cents is 40 cents, which is what's happening now, would that help, having a fixed price per litre excise?
Again, it's a great policy, and it's a policy that we introduced while we were in government. When we first got into government last time round, the excise was indexed. It kept going up as the price of petrol went up. John Howard in about 2001 actually removed that indexation of the excise, and now the excise is actually fixed. It's currently at about 38 cents a litre, and it's not going up, so that's a good thing. That's something that we fixed when we were last in government. But I guess what we've said is that we would take it one step further and we would reduce that excise by another 5 cents a litre. So our proposition would be that fuel is always going to be cheaper under us. That's our value proposition.
And has anyone in Canberra decided, has any political party put their hand up and said, if we're in government, all government cars will be run on gas instead of petrol? Because being here in Western Australia, you spoke about the Northwest Gas the project on the shelf up there. We've got this fairly close to usable commodity just bubbling up out of the seabed. Why isn't our federal government showing initiative and leadership in this issue and converting their V8 petrol guzzlers, which sit idling every day out the front of Parliament, why aren't they being converted to gas or buying LPG vehicles?
Well, the government is actually currently, the Comcar fleet is actually currently undergoing a trial in terms of more environmentally friendly cars. But the more important issue that I thought I'd pick up on is that there is actually a worldwide increase in demand for gas. And economically and environmentally, I believe that we ought to encourage more gas exploration production. And in this budget, one of the things that has happened is that the second largest tax revenue measure is actually a $2.5 billion additional tax on the Northwest Shelf Gas project. Now that's got